Hey everyone, so now that Baldur's Gate 3 is finally out, I've basically been playing it non-stop since release day, all weekend long. So, I mean, if all you really want to know is whether or not I enjoy the game, you could probably just stop the video right there and go home, because I think that probably tells you everything that you need to know. But, I've reached a point in the game that I think is a good stopping point to kind of like stop and collect my thoughts on what I think about the game so far. And I figured I would do a sort of off-the-cuff video letting you guys know how it's going so far and the kinds of things that I've done. Now, I will be trying my best to keep this spoiler-free, though like I said, this is going to be kind of off-the-cuff, so just to give you an idea as to where I am so far in the story without really giving too much away, I'm currently level 5, which is really when the game opens up power-wise for a lot of classes, and I've essentially cleared out most of the starting area, and I'm currently moving on through the Underdark to what I assume is the next large area of the game. So, as far as I can tell, I'm basically done with quote-unquote Act 1, and I'm working my way towards Act 2. So, first things first, I think I'm going to go ahead and talk about sort of my general thoughts on the game so far, like what I think about the battle mechanics and the general like dialogue and everything as a whole. Then I'm going to move on to talking a little bit more specifically about my run playing as a paladin, and a dragonborn for that matter, and how that I think has affected the story, as well as some thoughts on the whole oath and oath-breaking system. And then near the end, I think I'm going to do a quick follow-up to my last video where I was talking about whether or not you should play as the DarkUrge origin, which is the sort of like, you know, evil quote-unquote murder hobo origin. And a lot of people were hesitant as to whether or not they should try that, and I definitely have some more thoughts on it now that I have beaten Act 1, and if you're curious about what I was saying last time, I'll leave a link to that video in the cards and in the description down below. But first things first, I have to say I really like the general mechanics of the game and how they've translated 5e to a video game while still making changes to the system to actually make it work better in a video game setting. Now, like I said in some of my older videos, I love 5e. I think it's a really fun game to play, but it definitely has problems, and there are definitely a fair number of problems that you could have when trying to translate it into a game, and I think that they've made a lot of very interesting decisions in how they're going to translate it and improve upon the system in many ways. I think that the biggest improvement is easily the martial combat system, in that there is one, because 5e is famously kind of boring as a martial character, and again, I've sort of made videos talking about that before as well, if you're curious about my thoughts on that more specifically. But what they've done in this game is each martial weapon, so like spears, swords, hammers, whatever, they each have abilities that you can use once per short rest each. So like a hammer might have an ability to daze a target, or try to smack them so that they get knocked back. And it's kind of like Battlemaster maneuvers, but each one can only be used once rather than it using a universal resource. So playing an actual Battlemaster still gives you a lot more versatility and power compared to it, but it really helps that for the non-Battle Masters, you have these abilities to kind of help mix up combat a little bit, and it also gives you more of an incentive for most people to take short rests more often. Like, for example, as a Paladin, the only thing that really recovers on a short rest is my Channel Oath ability, and so I'm not really necessarily incentivized to take short rests all that often because it doesn't recover my spell slots. But because of this martial combat system, pretty much anybody who uses a weapon in any capacity is going to want to take short rests fairly regularly in order to recharge these abilities. And some of these abilities are actually really nice, like dazing an opponent to make them easier to hit and make them have a harder time hitting you is really nice. And like there's some other ones where like a greatsword can use a pommel strike as a bonus action in order to get an extra attack out there. when they otherwise might not be able to, and like that's all really cool and everything. And I might make another video in the not too distant future talking about how I think that this system could be applied to 5e, and maybe compare and contrast it with the weapon mastery system that they've already been introducing with their 5.5 playtests that they've been doing. But of course, there's a lot more to this game other than fighting, and really, that's arguably even more impressive than how good the combat system is just how good the writing and the world and just everything about how you interact with the world is. I've been having a ton of fun actually role-playing in this role-playing game. I know, it's crazy! But yeah, like, actually seeing, like, what kinds of unique choices I get because of my race and class, and how NPCs in general react to me, and just... It's been so interesting how you can approach so many situations in so many interesting ways, like how I talked my way into a hostile area, mostly through just sheer intimidation and brute force, but without actually starting any combat. And then, of course, once I get into the heart of it, I then start combat with, like, the boss without having fought any of their minions along the way. And then, of course, that means I have to fight my way all the way back out, which was its own whole kind of hilarious kit and caboodle. But yeah, and I've been watching some other people play the game as well, obviously, you know, trying to avoid spoilers for myself, and I've noticed that there really is a ton of variability depending on, like, what kind of character you're playing, what origin you went with, and your class and your race, and not to mention just the general choices that you can make. Like, one of the streamers that I'm watching is playing a DarkUrge Paladin just like me, but they're playing a half-orc, whereas I'm playing a dragonborn, and they're playing Oath of Vengeance, whereas I'm playing Oath of the Ancients. And even just those two minor differences in our characters has led to some wildly different circumstances in how situations have played out. And not to mention that, like, just generally different choices being made along the way as well. So I'm really impressed in how much variability there is in the game just as a whole, and just how reactive it is to your choices. Like, I very rarely felt limited in my options, because I always felt like the game offered something that was at least somewhat close to what I wanted to do before I even saw what the options were. Speaking about Paladins, though, I think it is about time that I touched on the whole oath and oath-breaking system, as I've seen a lot of people talking about how hard it is to maintain their oath and things like that, and I feel like some people might be approaching this game too much from the perspective of it being a video game and not a role-playing game, if that makes any sense. Like, yes, it's obviously a video game, but if you're playing a paladin, out of all of the classes, they really expect you to actually roleplay the most. And I really like that, because I feel like it's helping force me to make sure I really consider my choices and think about my actions. And so far, I haven't had any issues maintaining my oath, save for one situation when I get to the DarkUrge section, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, like, I haven't really had too much trouble maintaining my oath, and to be fair, it does seem like the 3 different oaths have different levels of difficulty in how hard they are to maintain. Like, Oath of Devotion is definitely the hardest, because they are the most, like, lawful good, goody two-shoes, paragon of hope, beacon of justice, that kind of thing. So you really have to play, like, the classic lawful good, do-gooder kind of paladin. Like I said, I'm playing Oath of the Ancients, which is a little bit less strict. They seem to be mostly just about good vibes and making sure that people are okay and that you don't just actively do evil, and stuff like that. And then Oath of Vengeance, I've seen described as the kind of paladin who would throw a baby into the wheels of a carriage to stop a criminal they're chasing. So, if you really don't want to worry about oath breaking, maybe go with Oath of Vengeance paladins. But seriously, even without playing an Oath of Vengeance paladin, I haven't had too much trouble maintaining my oath by just thinking about what my character would do. And I think it's important that you actually try to actively roleplay in this game. And if you're just approaching this like you're playing Skyrim, for example, and you're just stealthing around, killing people before you ever interact with them, or stealing everything off of every dead body that you can find, just for the sake of loot, and all that other, like, stereotypical RPG stuff, like, of course, you're going to Oathbreak eventually. Like, as a paladin, I've been approaching every single situation diplomatically. Like, I pretty much never just run in and start attacking. Like, I always try to talk to everybody, and usually there's some interesting options that come up from being a paladin. And I'm just curious if maybe some people aren't, you know, really thinking about their choices that hard, because this game will punish and reward you for the choices that you make. But I also will admit that maybe some people are running into some bugs or something. Like, I'll admit, the game is not perfectly bug-free, although I've been having a pretty good experience with it so far. And like I said, I've only broken my oath once, and I guess we might as well get into that. Okay, so, the DarkUrge. And I'm going to do my best to avoid spoiling anything, of course, so forgive me if I have to talk around a few details, but I mean, honestly, so far, it's been going pretty good, especially, like I said, for being a paladin. You'd think that my DarkUrge would cause me to break my oath constantly, and, well, I mean, it has broken my oath once so far, but only the one time, and I do believe that that one event, and if you've already played the game, you probably know what event I'm talking about. It seems to be that's one of the few times where the game does force your hand as the DarkUrge. Like, that is your canon event, for lack of a better term. When, essentially, it was talked about in some of the previews that there is a special event that can occur when you sleep, where you will essentially wake up next to a dead body. And it's implied, of course, that you gored them in your sleep. And as far as I can tell, every single person who has played a DarkUrge gets that event eventually, and it's basically impossible to avoid. So, a lot of people have been scared off by that event, and I can see where they're coming from. They definitely pull at your heartstrings, I'm not gonna lie. Like, it made me feel real bad, and if you're just unable to handle that kind of thing, I totally get not wanting to continue with a DarkUrge run. But I will say that the character, as far as I can tell, still doesn't have that much significance in the storyline. Like, this really comes off, to me at least, as the kind of event that is meant to really raise the stakes and go like, hey, you're playing the DarkUrge, things aren't going to go your way all the time. And that event is really meant to, like, you know, give you a cold splash of water and really make you think about your urges and your choices. And it also introduces the main incentive for why you would want to play a DarkUrge, because shortly after that event transpires is when you meet your sort of weird goblin companion NPC, who rewards you with a magic item for indulging in your urges. So they give you a very direct incentive to be like, hey, if you're willing to indulge in your urges more often, you get cool, really powerful magic items, and whatnot. And then, of course, resisting your urges doesn't give you anything because you're just being a good person. But yeah, I will admit, I have looked up some stuff online about the NPC that you murder, and I'll admit I was a little bit wrong in my initial guess about how this would play out, in that they are not just some nameless random NPC, they are an actual NPC that you can meet before that event happens, and they even give you like a pretty cool scene with them before, you know, you murder them. But even if you're not playing as a DarkUrge character, it feels like this character literally only exists to kind of die a super horribly tragic death. Like, even if you're not playing DarkUrge, they're not like a party member. A lot of people, I think, seem to assume that they're a party member, and that the DarkUrge locks you out of them as a party member, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure, based off of the wiki and what people have been saying, that that is not the case, and that they're not even, like, a character that really has that much relevance later on, because even if you're not playing a DarkUrge, there's apparently, like, assassins that will try to kill them, And it's like, unless you're willing to like save scum or playing extremely carefully, it's really easy to be like just talking to them and then all of a sudden they get shot by an assassin and there's very little you could do about it. And, you know, so it really feels like this character literally only exists to be killed tragically, if that is any consolation for anybody who was turned off of their DarkUrge run from this event. But of course, as a paladin, that event hurt extra hard because it of course broke my oath. Though, to be fair, once again, it does seem like Vengeance Paladins can somehow get through that without breaking their oath. Like, I really feel like it should break your oath no matter what, because like even a Vengeance Paladin, like, I feel shouldn't be killing just a random innocent person when they're not even in pursuit of like any kind of actual goal or criminal or anything. But other than that one event, so far my urges have not caused me to break my oath at all, and it's actually been really interesting playing as the DarkUrge outside of that fixed event, because it does seem like, other than that, your urges are based off of skill checks. Like, for example, for whatever reason, one of my friends was reloading the scene where you first meet Gale for the first time, over and over, and I don't know why they were doing that, but during one of the instances when they would initiate dialogue with that scene, instead of just getting the normal dialogue options, they just randomly were forced into chopping off Gale's hand, which was of course the DarkUrge choice, right away without any prompting. So I think that is evidence enough that a lot of the time when you're given some kind of serious DarkUrge option like that, it is making a secret roll behind the scenes that will decide whether or not you are forced into taking that action. And I think that that is a really interesting way of handling that, and I mean, with how early on in the game that is, I'm really curious as to how this is going to evolve later on. And even when the game isn't forcing you into making those kinds of choices, the DarkUrge still has a lot of impact on the game as a whole. Like, you get a ton of different narration and options in general by playing the DarkUrge. Like, for example, there was this one instance where you see, like, you know, a dead body and somebody's mourning over it, and you can join in on mourning the body, but this one particular time, I just suddenly got a narration that said, you don't mourn over dead bodies, you revel in them. And you know, it basically just canceled out that dialogue option and made me pick something else. And I thought that that was really interesting as well. And of course, like, there's entire NPCs. Like I said, there's that goblin NPC that I'm pretty sure only exists in a DarkUrge run, and that is really interesting, and I'm curious to see what kind of role they'll play later on in the game. But of course, again, even apart from all of that, there's still the grand mystery of who you are. Like, are you a ball spawn? Are you something else? Are you just some random serial killer? And even if you are, is there anything you can do about it? The DarkUrge introduces this really interesting mystery aspect to the game that I just feel is kind of lost in a fully custom run. Like, like I mentioned in my last video on this, the main strength of playing a origin character, including the DarkUrge, is that you have a lot more direct ties to the narrative. Like, Will, for example, has a very distinct interaction with Karlach because he was sent to kill her. And so there's that interaction that wouldn't exist if you don't have Will in your party or aren't playing as him. So the DarkUrge is similarly, like, you have this direct mystery and all these unique interactions with your allies that you have to start considering and dealing with, that if you're just playing a custom character, it feels like in some ways, at least based off of my experience with Divinity Original Sin 2, that playing a custom character, it sort of makes you feel a little bit like an outsider in a way, because like I said, you don't have a direct tie to the narrative, you just kind of exist to lead the party, and you know, you of course interact with people, you make choices, you have an impact on the narrative, but there's no like direct motivation for what you're doing and why you're doing it beyond just whatever choice you decide to put on your character, like, out of game as a player. And as a result, like, you know, the connection just isn't as deep as when playing an Origin character. So, basically, overall, I definitely feel like playing a DarkUrge, like, I still stand by my choice to play a DarkUrge, and I definitely think that if you want to have more interactivity with the story and more options with various NPCs and whatnot, I still think I recommend playing a DarkUrge character. Now, if you're squeamish, maybe you don't want to play a DarkUrge character. If you don't think you can handle sudden acts of violence and things like that, I totally get it. I'm not saying you have to play a DarkUrge character, and, you know, maybe if things might go too far sometimes, but so far, it's not like you're just randomly killing party members or anything, and I highly, highly doubt that the game is going to suddenly force me to just wake up having murdered all of my party members or anything like that. Like, that just doesn't seem like something that Larian would, like, force you into, even with this kind of DarkUrge origin. I'm pretty sure that they're still gonna, like, for the most part, give you a choice on that. And you might be talking about, you know, you might be thinking about Gale, and how I mentioned how you can randomly chop off Gale's hand, but, and to be fair, I don't know how that plays out if you do chop off Gale's hand, but the way that scene is structured makes me think that Gale can still become a party member, because, like, just losing your hand doesn't necessarily mean that you die. You know, like, he could easily bandage that up, and he's also a wizard. I could see that, like, maybe he becomes a party member later on, and he replaces that hand with, like, a prosthetic, or a mage hand, even, and that could be cool. And it's not like he even knows that you're the one that did that, so unless, like, whatever companions were with you at the time, like, tattle on you, I could totally see Gale still becoming a party member, or even romanceable, at that point in the game. So who knows? Maybe maybe that's still not actually, like, forcing you into anything super serious. But anyways, overall, I would definitely say that DarkUrge has proven to be a very interesting and positive add to my game. Obviously, not all the things that have happened are positive. Breaking my oath was annoying, and killing that NPC against my will was less than ideal, but I still think it made the story better because it forced me into that difficult situation. Like, what do you do when you wake up next to a dead body? Like, you know, do you hide it and try to just ignore it and hope for the best? Do you fess up? Do you try to make it look like somebody else could have done it? Like, there's lots of different ways that you could play that scene, and, you know, it's a really interesting story element to force the character into that difficult choice. And difficult choices, I've always found, make for some of the best stories. But yeah, I think I've rambled on long enough about the game. Needless to say, obviously my opinions on Act 1 so far are really positive, and I think I might make another follow-up video talking about Act 2 and eventually Act 3, which I guess is the end when I beat the game. So I'll keep making these progress updates on how I think the game is going and what's going on and everything, and I definitely look forward to seeing your thoughts in the comments below. As always, I'm always happy to continue the conversation down below, so go ahead, let me know, how has your playthrough been going so far? Have you decided to play the DarkUrge, and how are things going for you? And how many accidental murders have you committed today? But yeah, like I said, if you want to see me make more videos like this in the future, by all means leave me a like and a subscribe, and I guess I'll see you guys next time.